My husband decided to go to his sister's wedding and left me when I was 9 months pregnant. I ruined my relationship with my sister and exposed her lies. My husband left me to attend his sister's extravagant wedding while I was 9 months pregnant. I ended up ruining my relationship with my sister-in-law and exposing her lies. I'm 35 years old, and my husband, Andrew, is 39. We've been married for 7 years now. We have a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm currently 7 months pregnant with our second child. The reason I'm sharing all of this is because I need someone to listen, and what better place than here, where I can remain anonymous. When Andrew and I were dating, I never minded how close he was with his family. They were always kind to me when we get together. But shortly after we married, I realized just how tight-knit he was with his mother and sister. They seemed to have this gang-like bond. It didn't affect our marriage at first, but I'd roll my eyes whenever they'd team up together. It wasn't directed at me, so I just let it go. At family gatherings or parties, you'd usually find them sitting together, talking behind people's backs. At first, they tried to include me in their little discussions, but I'm not the type to indulge in small talk, so I kept my distance. Still, it didn't bother me, and I didn't let them bother me. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law weren't exactly warm toward me, but they kept their distance, and I did the same. I wasn't interested in their backhanded compliments or fake friendliness. After I got pregnant with my first child, I stopped visiting my in-laws' house altogether. For one, I was looking for a reason to cut ties with them. And two, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were toxic. Andrew was always kind and gentle, but when he got around his mom and sister, it was like he turned into a completely different person. As long as he was with me at home, I didn't care what he did during the 2 or 3 hours he spent with them on weekends. I gave him his space. But when our daughter Sarah turned 3, things took a turn for the worse. My in-laws started filling her head with nonsense, telling her that her mother was a bad person. But Sarah didn't fall for it. She stood up for me, telling them that I was good, and when she came home, she cried as she told me what had happened. Andrew laughed it off, saying they were just teasing her, but I knew it was much worse than that. From that moment on, I never left Sarah alone with those women. Things really started to spiral last year when my sister-in-law began dating a wealthy businessman from Scotland. I understand she was thrilled to have caught the attention of someone so successful, but I couldn't help but wonder, why was Andrew so excited about it? To give you some context, my father-in-law, or Phil as we call him, retired years ago and moved out to a farmhouse in the countryside. I've only met him a few times, and he's a no-nonsense guy, unlike the rest of them. I guess that's why he left to find some peace and quiet. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, however, are jobless and rely on the rent from one of Phil's properties and his allowance. Andrew also gives his mother part of his salary. I've always been independent, so I don't mind Andrew helping his mom out. But back to the point, once my sister-in-law started dating this wealthy man, her whole attitude shifted. She started acting like she was a princess or something. She'd constantly flaunt the expensive gifts she got from him, and at every family gathering or social event, she made sure everyone knew how rich her boyfriend was. The funniest part was that my mother-in-law was just as smug, floating around like she was part of the same high society. I was left behind while my husband attended his sister's lavish wedding, all while I was 9 months pregnant. This led to me destroying my relationship with my sister-in-law and revealing the lies she'd been telling. I'm 35, and my husband, Andrew, is 39. We've been married for 7 years. We have a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm currently 7 months pregnant with our second. The reason I'm telling all of this is that I need someone to listen to me, and we're better than here, where I can stay anonymous. When Andrew and I first started dating, I never had a problem with how close he was to his family. They were always welcoming and sweet whenever I joined them. But not long after we got married, I started noticing just how inseparable he was from his mom and sister. It was like the three of them had this unspoken bond, like a clique. At first, it didn't bother me, but I started rolling my eyes at how they would team up together. It wasn't aimed at me, so I just shrugged it off. At family gatherings or events, they always stuck together, gossiping about everyone else. In the beginning, they tried to pull me into their little talks, but I'm not someone who enjoys small talk, so I kept my distance. They didn't bother me, and I made sure not to let them get to me. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law weren't the friendliest toward me, but they stayed out of my way, and I did the same. I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Once I got pregnant with our first child, I made the decision to stop visiting my in-laws. For one, I needed a reason to distance myself from them. And two, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were toxic influences. Andrew was always sweet and gentle, but something about his interactions with his mother and sister would change him completely. As long as he was at home with me, I didn't mind what he did during the few hours he spent with them on weekends. I gave him space. But things took a turn when our daughter Sarah turned 3. My in-laws began whispering poison in her ear, telling her that I was a bad mom. Sarah wasn't fooled, though. She defended me, saying that I was a good mom. And when she came home, she tearfully told me what had happened. Andrew tried to laugh it off, saying they were just joking with her, but I could see their true intentions. After that, I never left Sarah alone with those women again. Things started to spiral out of control when my sister-in-law began dating a wealthy businessman from Scotland. I understand why she was excited. He was successful and obviously smitten with her, but I couldn't help wondering, why was Andrew so thrilled about it? For some context, my father-in-law, or Phil as we call him, retired a few years ago and moved to a farmhouse out in the countryside. I've only met him a handful of times, and he's a no-nonsense kind of guy, unlike the others. Maybe that's why he chose to leave and live in peace. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, however, don't have jobs and rely on the rent from one of Phil's properties, plus the allowance he gives them. Andrew also gives his mother a portion of his salary. I've always been independent, so I don't mind Andrew helping his mom out. But here's the thing. Once my sister-in-law started dating this rich guy, her whole demeanor shifted. She started acting like she was royalty or something. She'd make a point to show off all the expensive gifts he bought her, and at every family gathering or social event, she'd make sure everyone knew how wealthy her boyfriend was. What was even more ridiculous was that my mother-in-law was just as smug, walking around like she was a part of the high society they were trying so hard to emulate. Andrew almost let it slip that his sister had gone on and on about how she could bake the best version of this particular dessert, and how she promised to serve it to the family during a dinner they were having. I was stunned. I told Andrew I wasn't about to do all that hard work, especially in my condition, just so someone else could take credit for it. And on top of that, I wasn't even invited to the dinner. He tried to justify it by saying that I was already 7 months pregnant, and his mom thought I'd be uncomfortable with guests around, so they left me off the guest list. Even if I believed her intentions were genuine, I really didn't. Why didn't they tell me about the dinner when they came over asking for dessert? Andrew just shrugged, saying he didn't know. On Saturday, Andrew went to pick up his dad and mentioned that he'd be back Sunday night after the dinner. Of course, I want to make a big scene and argue with Andrew, but I chose to focus on my own peace of mind, knowing that no matter what I did, it wouldn't stop him from going. On Sunday, I deliberately turned off my phone and locked myself in my room with Sarah. I'm sure my mother-in-law and sister-in-law tried calling me, and when they couldn't reach me, they left a voicemail on the landline. I ignored that call too. Even though I wasn't at peace knowing they'd be cursing me for backing out, I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing I hadn't given in to their pressure. On Monday morning, when I turned my phone back on, I was bombarded with missed calls and voicemails. The messages started with pleading and eventually turned to cursing. As soon as they saw that I had received the messages, my mother-in-law called me. Oh God, that was the longest rant I've ever heard. I had always known her true nature, but that day I got to hear just how venomous she could really be. She accused me of ruining their dinner party and called me a witch. Apparently, they had been counting on me to bring the dessert, so they didn't bother to order or prepare anything. My sister-in-law had been hoping to impress her future in-laws by passing off my dessert as her own. So, in the end, the sweet tooth Scots had to leave the dinner table disappointed, without any dessert. And somehow, I was the one getting the blame for their dissatisfaction. While my mother-in-law was showering me with curses, I couldn't help but picture their faces at the dinner table. Honestly, it wasn't even a big deal. They could have just ordered dessert from a restaurant. I know my sister-in-law likes to boast about her baking skills, but a store-bought dessert could have at least saved them from the embarrassment. But, hey, that's not my problem. I told her just that and ended the call. Amidst all the calls and messages from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, there was one late-night message from Andrew. He told me he wouldn't be coming back that night and would return on Monday after work. When Andrew got home later that evening, he was quiet but not angry. I tried to tell him what his mom had said, but he cut me off, saying he didn't want to get involved. He said I should consider myself lucky that he wasn't scolding me for embarrassing his family the night before, and I shouldn't expect him to take my side against anything his mom and sister said. That's when I completely lost it. I never took their words seriously, knowing how malicious they could be. But what in the world was Andrew doing? I mean, first off, he should have stepped in when I was excluded from the family dinner. How was I responsible for ruining an event I wasn't even invited to? Since then, things have gone downhill, and we're not speaking. Neither of us has made any effort to make things right. In my mind, I feel like I'm done with them, but deep down, I still catch myself wondering, did I really ruin their reputation by standing my ground? I don't know, guys. Update 1. Hi all, it's been 2 months since my original post. I'm in my 40th week now, just about to pop. After my last post, I started to realize just how much I had tolerated from Andrew. It was like I kept making excuses for him, letting him get away with things that in hindsight I shouldn't have. 2 weeks after that whole incident, I had a scan appointment, and Andrew came along. On our way home, I tried to bring up what had happened, but he told me to just move on and focus on my health. By then, he seemed like he was back to normal. I took it as a positive sign that he wasn't holding a grudge, but deep down, something fell off. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was being secretive about something. Anyway, just this morning, I woke up to find Andrew packing his bags. When I opened my eyes, there he was, shoving his wedding suit into one of his bags. I froze. I almost yelled at him, demanding to know what he was doing. He said he was heading to Scotland for his sister's wedding. I was speechless. I couldn't understand how or when this had even happened. I bombarded him with questions. Why hadn't he told me about this? Why didn't I know when the date was set? And how on earth could he leave me, especially with my due date tomorrow? I was due to give birth tomorrow. He tried to dodge my questions, responding with short, one-word answers. I told him he couldn't just avoid me like this. I was furious, heartbroken, and in total shock all at once. Could you imagine your husband leaving you alone with a toddler on your due date? I can't even begin to express what that feels like. I won't lie. I wasn't calm. I grabbed his shoulder and shook him, demanding answers. He told me that it was a last-minute decision and that he had no choice. Apparently, his sister's soon-to-be in-laws insisted on this particular date, and there was nothing he could do about it. Of course, he could have skipped the wedding. As we were in the middle of this conversation, the doorbell rang. Andrew rushed to answer it, almost as if he had been expecting someone. It was his mother. She stormed into the house, yelling at Andrew for being late. She dragged his bags out of the room, telling him not to bother packing anything else because they could just buy whatever was missing in Scotland. The way she said it felt like a mockery aimed straight at me. I wanted to hit her in that moment, especially when she smirked at me. But I knew it was too late to do anything, so I just went back to my room. I threw the rest of Andrew's things into the living room and locked the door behind me. I could hear my mother-in-law cursing me at the top of her lungs. They left soon after that, and it hit me. This is why Andrew had been so secretive for the past month. I had been thinking he was just caught between me and his family, but now I realized the truth. I was in so much pain, mentally and physically, crying out loud in frustration. I didn't even notice that the chaos had woken Sarah up. She came to me, wrapped her arms around me, and said that everything would be okay and that I should be excited because soon we'd have a baby in the house. Her innocent words broke my heart, and I hugged her tight. We spent the day playing in bed, trying to keep myself distracted. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling of being abandoned by Andrew in my time of need. I've been breaking down every now and then. I called my sister to stay with me tomorrow because I don't know when my labor will start. I had to make this update today because what happened this morning is suffocating me. Please wish me a healthy and peaceful labor. Update 2. Hey everyone. I know it's been months since I last posted. First of all, I'm blessed with a baby boy. Thank you. Now, back to that day. Right after my post, I logged into Facebook and saw Andrew posting pictures of himself, smiling and having a great time with his family in Scotland. I couldn't hold it in anymore, and I broke down completely. It was already past midnight, and Sarah was sound asleep. I went to the bathroom, where I let my emotions pour out. I had been keeping it together all day for Sarah's sake. I cried for what felt like an hour, and just as I was on the brink of passing out, I realized my water had broken. Somehow, I managed to crawl to the living room and call for an ambulance. Everything that happened after that is blurry. The next thing I remember was being in the ambulance on my way to the hospital. When I finally stabilized, I cried out Sarah's name. The nurse later told me that they had found Sarah crying beside me while I was slipping in and out of consciousness. Since the house had been empty, they had brought her along, and she was sitting in the front with one of the attendants. I felt a wave of relief knowing that my daughter was safe. Just minutes after arriving at the hospital, I gave birth to my baby boy. The nurse mentioned that they tried reaching Andrew, but his phone was unavailable. My sister arrived in the early hours of the morning. She had driven 120 miles to get there. Once she found out about what had happened, she scolded me for not calling her sooner. Honestly, I thought I had more time. She also told me I needed to get rid of Andrew as soon as possible. Because the hospital officials had discovered me in such a condition, they contacted the police. The police asked if Andrew had abused or assaulted me, as they assumed I had been abandoned in that state. I told them the truth. There hadn't been any physical abuse, but mentally and emotionally, yes. Andrew was charged with negligence. His negligence had endangered 3 lives: mine, Sarah's, and the unborn baby's. It sends chills down my spine thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't called the ambulance in time. I'm so grateful to God for keeping us safe. I was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, and by that time, my parents had arrived. They lived 2,500 miles away, but they were determined to sue Andrew and his family for the mental abuse I'd suffered during my pregnancy. They packed up all my things from the house while I was still in the hospital. I had no desire to stay with Andrew anymore. Who would want a husband like that? After being discharged, I went back to my hometown with my parents and sister. It wasn't until almost a week after I gave birth that Andrew finally returned home. Based on his Facebook activity, it seemed like they had extended their stay after the wedding to explore Scotland. It blew my mind to see how stress-free he was, completely enjoying his vacation, totally unbothered by the fact that his wife was due around that time. He didn't even bother to call or text me during those days. I didn't try to contact him either, though. By then, I had made up my mind to destroy him and his family. A week later, when he finally returned, he found an empty house, a legal divorce notice, and the charges the police had filed against him. He had a week to show up and give his statement. He panicked and called me 100 times. I won't lie. I took a little satisfaction in seeing his endless calls and hearing his pleading voicemails. Soon after, I started getting calls and voicemails from my mother-in-law, begging me to talk to them. I told my parents everything. They immediately called Andrew and insisted that he come to our house. That very day, he flew in with his mother. My parents didn't hold back. They humiliated both of them for the way they'd tortured me, threatening to ruin their lives. Andrew begged to speak to me privately. He literally fell on his knees, asking for forgiveness and reconciliation. He started pulling at my heartstrings, telling me that our child needed a father and that I shouldn't deprive him of the chance to be happy. I asked him the gender of our second child, and he fell completely silent. My baby boy was already a week old, yet his father didn't even know he had been born. Do you really think a child needs a father like that? His mother also begged for forgiveness, saying that these court cases would ruin their reputation in front of their new relatives, her future in-laws. But I didn't care about her reasoning. I just laughed at her excuse. Eventually, my parents told them to leave. They insisted on seeing the newborn, but I didn't want them near my children. I didn't want their eyes or their shadow around my little ones. My father kicked them out of the house. While that was happening, I reached out to my sister-in-law's new husband on social media. I introduced myself since we'd never met before. To my surprise, he was also suspicious of Andrew and his family when they kept me away from the family dinner and wedding, all under the guise of my pregnancy. I told him everything that had happened to me. He was shocked, saying that he had noticed Andrew just chilling at the wedding while his wife was in labor. Although it was too late, he asked about my sister-in-law and I told him the truth about her character. I also mentioned the whole apple pie incident. He said their behavior was definitely shady, but now it made sense to him. Apparently, my sister-in-law had been pretending to be a chef, and my mother-in-law had backed up her lies, claiming they own a chain of restaurants in the countryside. I revealed the truth, that my sister-in-law had never even boiled an egg. He called her a gold digger and promised to keep our conversation private. I told him I wasn't bothered if he shared the truth about her. In fact, I wanted them to know it was me who exposed them. It's been 10 months since that fateful day. My divorce was finalized last week. I received a substantial alimony settlement on the grounds of maternal and child negligence, mental abuse during my pregnancy, and safety concerns. I also got a share of the house since I had contributed to its purchase. I gave Andrew an ultimatum. He has 3 months to pay me for my share of the house, or it'll be put up for auction. Plus, I'm getting child support. The interesting thing is, shortly after my conversation with my sister-in-law's husband, I started getting texts from my sister-in-law, accusing me of ruining her life. Later, I found out that her husband had done some digging into my in-laws' background. It turns out they weren't nearly as wealthy as they'd made themselves out to be. And my sister-in-law had lied about a lot of things, including her job. According to some of the gossiping relatives, the Scotts sent my sister-in-law back home and filed for divorce. They accused her of money laundering. Apparently, she had been stealing money from her in-laws' locker and sending it to her mother. Her husband also labeled her a gold digger, saying she had already drained thousands of dollars from him while they were dating. I'm enjoying the gossip over a glass of wine. I wish the trio, Andrew, his mother, and his sister, a long life full of gossip and poverty.